Hello, my name's Robin Vincent and welcome to another Molten Music Monthly. It's spring, it's England, it's cold but it's not quite raining, and everything is just about starting to come back to life. Unlike the world of music technology, which is completely dead. There's nothing. February is sort of often a bit quiet, and this year has been no disappointment. It's completely devoid of anything interesting to talk about. So I thought, instead of just trying to drag something up from the bottom, I was going to do something slightly different. And in celebration of our YouTube channel about to hit 1 million views, 1 million views. I mean, I don't even know how to talk about that. It's just the most extraordinary thing. It's awesome. It's fantastic. Way, yay, or something. I don't know, it's great. So anyway, in celebration of that, I thought I would have just a really good rant. You know, it's cathartic. I think it's healthy every now and again to give air and to give voice to the horror of music technology. And after which we can hopefully move on with a bit of a spring in our step. And you know me, you know, I'm the eternal optimist because, you know, in this industry, everything is pretty awesome. There's just stuff all the time, more gear, more boxes, more bits of software that go, whoa, more lights that go, doo, noises, whoa, synthesizers, audio recording, plugins and stuff that just do amazing things. The whole thing is just, wow. So yeah, let's just sit down and slag it off for a bit. So please excuse the language, and I can assure you that normal service will be restored very shortly. And so, Mum, if that's you watching, you might want to turn off about now. So, coming up, Thunderbolt, what a huge bunch of laptops, just off. MIDI, what a gloriously helpful and awesomely fabulous, great big pile of Intel, what the are you on about? Nobody understands it, nobody. But first, last month I talked about Softube's Console 1, where I said that it's got a fabulous new update where it can now run UAD plugins. Now I completely assumed that that sort of meant something about the hardware of the Console 1 having a DSP chip and being able to run UAD plugins. Great, I thought. What a fantastic thing. But no, that's not the case at all. I was completely wrong. All it actually means is that you can run UAD plugins within the Console 1 plugin software. So instead of putting it in an insert in Cubase as you normally would, you can put it within the Console 1 software that's inserted in the insert instead, which gives you marginally, slightly, tiny bit better control more quickly, I suppose. So rather than being like, oh, hey, look at this, you can run UAD plugins in this thing, it's now kind of, oh, so I still need to have the UAD hardware. I need to already own all those plugins, but I can run them slightly more efficiently in the Console 1 software. Great. So that's awesome, just nowhere near as awesome as I thought it was. But never mind, it's all good, I suppose. Right, on with the rant. Thunderbolt then, what a load of what a load of overpromised and underachieving codswallop. It's supposed to be the perfect interconnect, the thing that's pulling us forward into a future where everything is just the one port and the one cable and it all connects beautifully together. Right. You just never know what it's doing or if it's working or what's supposed to happen next. And just because it worked one way when you did it the first time on the next system you build it into, it works completely differently. I did a video all about it a couple of months ago, just when Universal Audio, Focusrite and Microsoft seemed to have been doing and tinkering with it all at the same time. Microsoft said, it works, it's fabulous, here it is. Thunderbolt 3, it's great, it's the amazing thing, it's all sorted out now, it's all natively supported. Focusrite went, great, we've got Thunderbolt 2 devices. We don't yet support Thunderbolt 3. UAD said, oh yes, we've got Thunderbolt 2 devices. We sort of support Thunderbolt 3, but we're not really sure because it seems to work here and then doesn't work over here. And in the end, the area of Thunderbolt that Microsoft say they fixed doesn't seem to be the one that anybody's actually supporting. Although, funnily enough, it all just seems to work as well at the same time, regardless of who says who supports what. Confused yet? Yeah, no, I am. I mean, I build a lot of these systems. I build a lot of Thunderbolt systems now, and they all work. They do all work. Let me get that across straight away to say that Thunderbolt as a protocol, as an interconnect, yes, it works, but it's a massive ball ache to get it to that stage. And none of it seems to make a whole lot of sense. It's incoherent, it's inconsistent, and there seems to be masses of differences between the technologies that are involved, where it's something which should be completely standard, just isn't in any way, shape or form. A few weeks ago, I decided I was going to make a video about it, you know, how to plug it together, how to get it to work. But just because it was so random and so inconsistent, and so many times I was banging my head against the thing going, oh, I just don't know, that it would be impossible to do a video and put forward a single way of making it work. Let me try to unpack that a little bit. In high-end systems, this is all about high-end systems, X99 chipset systems, and there tends to be two brands of motherboard. There's ASUS and there's Gigabyte. Both of them provide well-known, well-regarded motherboards that are used in the industry for audio systems and other high-end creative PCs. Now, ASUS went the route of putting Thunderbolt on the board, but you can only access it via an expansion card that then goes into a PCIe slot and plugs into the board, and there you go. Gigabyte did something similar, I think, but it seemed to be a lot less available, and now they are integrating it directly into the boards, which is no bad thing. Now, in building systems based on the ASUS technology, the thing that frustrates me the most is that the Thunderbolt technology does not exist in Windows. There's no entry in the device manager, there's nothing to tell you that the thing is working. And with the ASUS in particular, because you're putting an expansion card in, you never know whether you've put it in the right slot or whether you've put the BIOS settings right, because there's all sorts of deep level settings you've got to set in the BIOS that have to correlate to the card and which slot it's in. So you have this situation where you're plugging it in and you're setting the settings, and then you're going into Windows and you can't find it, and the software says it's not there, or is it there? It's not really sure. It's not really showing you the right information, or is it? Or it's showing you the information from the last thing that you had plugged in when you're swapping a card. It's frustrating. But eventually you do stumble upon the right combination and things start to light up. Sometimes you actually actively need to hot plug something to sort of force it into existence, where it goes, oh yeah, Thunderbolt, yeah, I know, here I am, look at that. No, you can't run it. Of course you can't. You need to click something over here to allow me to work, but at least I'm here. Look, hey, Thunderbolt, hey. And then when you do enable it, it's then plain sailing. But getting to that point is the sort of thing that makes you lose hair. On the other side, the Gigabyte stuff is a lot less trouble because it's there, it's on the board, the drivers actually come on the disk and you install it and it's there and it says that it's there and it goes, hello, and the software, you press the details button and it gives you all the details. It's great. However, I've had far more trouble with the Gigabyte Thunderbolt than I have with the ASUS. I've had strange blue screens and weird problems on rebooting where the system gets stuck when a certain device is plugged into the Thunderbolt. And that's not necessarily Gigabyte's fault. It's just a lot less smooth once it's working than on the ASUS. Or is it? Oh, I don't know. I don't know if I can remember anymore. I mean, all I can say that every time I sit down to build a Thunderbolt system, it takes time and thought and dedication to coax it into existence. And we shouldn't have to be doing that. And then there's the adapters. I mean, just don't get me started on the flipping adapters. There's this big chunky thing from StarTech which you plug in, which sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't. Then there's a little one from Apple that seems to work a bit more often. Or does it? I don't know. I mean, I was doing some testing yesterday on a Gigabyte based system and I decided to swap adapters, and that completely messed with the Thunderbolt entirely. It didn't know what it was doing. I plugged it in and it didn't seem to work, and I plugged the other thing into it because it wouldn't actually come to life until you have a Thunderbolt device in, not the adapter. The adapter's not enough. It has to have a Thunderbolt device as well, and then it sort of sprung to life. But it wouldn't when I plugged the StarTech one in, and then I put the Apple one back in that was working previously, and then that wasn't working anymore. And in the end, the only way I could force the whole thing to work again was to reset the BIOS, which doesn't make any sense. And it's all very well you Apple users looking smug with your new MacBook and its array of Thunderbolt 3 connections. Yes, that's fine, but what about your Mac hardware? What about your desktop stuff? You can go out and buy your Apple OS X compatible Thunderbolt 3 interfaces, but not be able to plug it into your desktop because there hasn't been a hardware update for years and years and years. And there's a massive lack of Thunderbolt 3 devices. It's all adapters everywhere. And actually, audio interfaces like the Focusrite Claret work better on Thunderbolt 2 than they do on Thunderbolt 3 currently. But that may change, although the installation on Thunderbolt 3 is simpler than it is on Thunderbolt 2. I mean, the installation should be the same, but it's not. Thunderbolt 3 seems to support the hot plugin much, much better, which is the thing that Microsoft fixed, was the hot plugin and the rearranging of resources. So that does tend to work well, whereas on Thunderbolt 2, you sometimes have to come up with an order of turning things on. So maybe I'll do the interface first, then I'll plug in the computer, do a computer first, and then it will work. It's just this level. The level of faff is extraordinary in this new, future, lovely, fast, super new technology. I mean, when it's working, and it does work, as I say, it absolutely does work. So what you're hearing is the frustration of the computer system builder, because you have no idea. You end users, you have no idea. You sit there with your computers going, oh, this is great. Oh, look, I had a little crash. That's awful, right? Let me phone the police. You have no idea of the sweat and tears that have gone into making that system work. And from my position, making computers for audio production, it's very hard. Yeah, I mean, you hear on forums people say, oh, no, it's not difficult, just, you can build it yourself, it's easy. Yeah, maybe. But that's not what I hear from people. The emails and requests for support that I get from people who haven't bought a system from me, they're just trying to pick my brains because it's flipping hard. So anyway, the good news with Thunderbolt is that it does absolutely and completely work, provided that you follow the manufacturer's guidelines on what it's supporting and you get the right adapter and you fiddle with it. Sort it, just, come to me and I'll sort it out for you. Buy one of my machines and I'll do all of the blood, sweat and tears bit before you have to do it. So you can just be that end user who plugs something in and enjoys himself. Because that's what we want. That's what we want in the end. So that's what I'll do. But honestly, I think at the end of the day, we're kind of waiting for the next generation of motherboards, because Thunderbolt 3 is a sort of bolted on still at the moment. Although Gigabyte have integrated it, they really integrated USB 3.1 first, and they have since kind of added in the Thunderbolt support. So I think the next generation of high-end systems are going to be the ones that are going to crack it, and that would be great. But they're still a fair way away. So we'll just have to wait and see. Laptops. Oh, I don't know. Laptops. I get asked all the time, is this laptop going to be good for audio recording and music production, they say? What about this one? Look at this fantastic looking Dell Yoga ZenBook thing, or this Asus Thinky zippity thing drilled out of a single piece of rock. What about this laptop? It's made out of a single piece of porcelain. Look how thin and fabulous it is. It's got awesome specs. Do you think that's going to make music? Is that going to be any good? Can I do low latency recording with this? I don't know. How would I know? How am I ever going to know? I mean, this whole business I've been doing with Surface Pro Audio I took a massive risk a couple of years ago when I bought the Surface Pro 3. I purchased it and I tested it, and as luck would have it, it was good. It would work. It would do it. Now, why was that difficult? Why would it be necessary for me to do that? Well, the reason is because most laptops are full of cheap crap. They're designed to be cheap. It's built to be cheap. It's because, you buy it at Tesco's, it's only 200 quid. It's going to be full of cheap crap. Now, the reason that's bad is because when you're trying to do audio production, when you're trying to make music, virtual instruments, plugins, recording, mobile recording, that sort of thing, you need low latency, almost real-time audio performance. And that's not what laptops are designed for. Laptops are designed for browsing, for internet stuff, for playing music and movies, and for writing little letters and doing your spreadsheets. They're for computing, and none of that requires an constant, consistent power to the ground processor performance. It doesn't need it. If you're playing back a movie, it sits there and it buffers for a second or two and then it plays it to you nice and smartly. You can't do that if you're trying to monitor effects through your software. You can't do that if you're playing guitar effects. You can't do that if you're trying to play a sampled piano or a virtual instrument. You need instant, real-time, low latency. And that's hard for a laptop to do. It's hard for any computer to do. But for laptops, they're completely and utterly not designed for it. And within that shell of a laptop, there can be components that hold on to the processor far too long. And that, because of their badly written drivers, can cause a glitch in your audio playback. You know, it's not the fault of the software, it's not the fault of your audio interface. Those things are fine. It's that the processor is being interrupted and something's going, oh, hey, look at me, I'm the network. And I'm going to think about something. I can't remember what it was I was going to ask that processor. I was going to ask, oh, now what was I going to say? And in all this time that's been taken up and the process going, what is it? Your audio is going, click, pop, gap, crackle. That's the reality of cheap components and bad drivers within computers. And there's a lot of it about. And it doesn't just exist in cheap computers, it exists in high-end computers as well. When I got the Surface Pro 4, I completely expected it to run perfectly like the Surface Pro 3 did. It did not. It had all sorts of problems because within it, there was just software that wasn't quite working right. And that caused glitches and pops and crackles when trying to do low latency audio. And there is no way of predicting that. You can't look at a spec sheet of a laptop and go, oh yeah, you see, because it's got that particular something or other or that, it's not going to be any good. Or because it has this processor or this amount of RAM or this make of something or other, that it's going to be good. You can't predict it in that way. And so whenever somebody comes to me and says, oh, will this laptop work for audio? My answer is always the same. I've no idea. I have absolutely no idea. There's no way that I can predict whether it will work or not. The only way I can do it is to test it. And people get ratty with me sometimes saying, whoa, you know, why don't you know? Why can't you test it? Well, I'm just a bloke. I'm not, you know, nobody sends me gear to test. I have to sort of beg and borrow and steal for it or buy it myself, which is, you know, what I did with the Surface Pro 3 and the Surface Pro 4. And will probably do again with the Surface Pro 5. And similarly with the Surface Studio, people would love to know whether that works for audio. And again, I have no idea. Because, you know, it's not just laptops, it's also all-in-ones and hybrids, and actually this extends to desktop computers as well, is that if you buy an off-the-shelf computer, then they are designed for computing. You know, they're not designed for music production. What are we thinking? So if ever you buy a computer off the shelf from PC World or from Curry's or wherever you buy them from, then you are taking a risk. However, I will temper that slightly to say that actually, in the majority of cases, most computers are capable of running a certain amount of music production software and hardware. It can work. You could buy a second-hand 200 quid laptop from eBay and it might work beautifully, and you could be, you know, doing your stadium gig the next day without a glitch, without a worry. It is completely possible. Any desktop computer could run music software and hardware successfully, but it may not. And that's the thing. And if you look on forums, they're full of people talking about laptops who are not quite working right. Well, here at Molten Music Technology, up until 6 months ago, we had 3 laptop models that we had for sale, which we had sourced and tweaked and got to run music software and hardware brilliantly. They were really very good. However, over the last 6 months, they've all fallen away because new versions have come out, new revisions of the motherboard, new slightly different versions of the laptop chassis, different components inside, and now they all glitch. They work a little bit. You can run the demo song on Pro Tools, you can run the demo song in Cubase, but you start pushing it to sort of 30–40% CPU and it starts crackling and it gives up. And that's not good enough. It's not good enough for me. I can't sell a laptop which I know is going to crap out when it gets to 40–50% CPU because it's not giving you the right advertised amount of power. The majority of people, when they buy a laptop, they might not go anywhere near that kind of level of plug-in usage or virtual instrument usage. And so they may never encounter a problem. And that's great, but I can't put my name on something which I know is not going to perform as well as it should. So currently, at this time, I can't offer any laptops at all. You know, that's a complete disaster. But that's where we are. But I'll keep my eye out, and hopefully in time I'll find another model or two that I can offer and support for music production. So where does that leave you? Well, I don't know. Buy a Surface Book. There's a good option. Or find an audio PC builder who does do laptops currently. Or I suppose buy a MacBook. I guess my best advice would be to aim high, to try to get something decent. Get it online, get it over the internet so that you have a 7-day, 14-day return window in that you can get it, you can try it, test your software, test your audio interface, and then send it back if it doesn't really work. But more or less, overall, you'll be all right. And if you want to be sure about getting something perfect in the shape of a desktop, then come and see me and let us build you an awesome desktop audio PC. But ultimately, I cannot advise you on which laptop to buy unless I have actually tried it myself. Which brings me on to Intel. I mean, what the is going on with your naming conventions? The number of times people ask me, I've got an i5 and I'm going to buy an i7, is that going to be really that much better? To which I answer helpfully, I have absolutely no idea. It completely depends on which i5 and which i7 you're talking about. Is it a desktop i5, a K series, a U series, a T series, an L series, a P, Q, a SIB series? Is it this generation, last generation, the generation before the last generation? Is it KB Lake, Sky, Lake, Forest, Gump, Haswell, Haribo? What is it exactly? The term i5, i7, things like that are completely useless. They don't mean anything. It tells you nothing about the number of cores or the speed of the processor or how much battery life you get or not get, or how much power, how much wattage it uses, what series it is, how old it is, and these things matter. Does anybody know what these things are about? Now, I don't want to give you a lecture on Intel nomenclature. On Intel naming conventions, because it's very boring. But my advice when comparing Intel processors is that you can only really do it within the same series. That's the only way that it makes some kind of sense. So generally speaking, there are 4 main series of processor. The U series, these are designed for ultrabooks. They're supposed to be cool and quiet. They are low power in terms of the sort of power they consume, and so they can have an extra long battery life and have rather sort of modest performance. And these are the processors you find in the Surface Book range, the Surface Pro, and also all the sexy, thin sort of Dell Ultrabooks and Asus ZenBooks and Yoga Whatsits. So although they are cool and sexy, they're actually bottom of the performance stakes. Next up, you have the M series, which is for mobile, I guess. Before we had the U series, we had the M series, and that continues to exist in sort of mid-range laptops. You don't quite get the battery power, but you do get much better actual processing performance. They are hotter, noisier, but they're the sort of laptops that we would have done ourselves had we found one that worked, because they can actually be quite capable little studios. Then you move up a step to the desktop series, or the K series, perhaps, although it's not always that simple. But these are the desktop processors. They go into proper motherboards, in proper computers, Tower and such like, and give you proper, hard-working desktop performance. And these typically go up to 4 cores on things like the Z170 or Z270 motherboard chipsets. And then at the top we have the E series, or the extreme processors. Now these give top performance. You find them in high-end, expensive systems, and can currently have up to about 10 cores and run on the X99 chipset. That sounds simple enough, but of course it's never quite that simple, because they're not always referred to in this way, and I don't even know whether my information is completely accurate, because it gets so confusing out there, you're never entirely sure what's going on. So for instance, on desktop processors, some of them have a K after them, which actually means unlocked, but other ones have a T after them, and that means lower power consumption. And then there's the ones that don't have the K, which means they're not unlocked. But it gets really confusing really quick, because they exist in the same series, but they don't really, I don't know. And then once you've picked your series, you have to think about the generation. Is this 1st generation or 3rd, 7th generation? 7th generation is currently where we are now with desktop and mobile processors. But with the high-end processors, we're still on 5th generation. And yet the high-end stuff, the 5th generation high-end stuff, is still more powerful than the 7th generation desktop stuff, because that still makes complete sense. But doesn't Moore's law say that processing power should be doubling every generation? Well, no, that's not quite right, because Moore's law actually refers to the transistor count, and that does more or less double, I think, every generation, but that doesn't translate to performance. And actually what we find is maybe, I don't know, a 20% in performance increase with generation, which is not anywhere near as much as sort of we were promised. But anyway, so calling something an i7 just means cool without knowing the series and the generation. You need to know how fast it is and how many cores are involved. So every time you see that annoying Intel advert where it goes bing, 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 i7 or whatever, they're not actually telling you anything at all. And if you're worried about whether a 4 gigahertz quad core is faster or slower than a 3.2 gigahertz 6 core, then actually just do the maths. You know, 4 cores running at 4 gigs, that's 16 gigahertz compared to 6 cores running at 3.2 gigahertz, which is 19.2 gigahertz. So the 6 core wins. I mean, that's as good a way as any to compare processors in a similar series and generation. So let's get into something a bit more musical then. MIDI. Does MIDI suck? No, it doesn't. I mean, it's a fabulously wonderful, extraordinary technology that has enabled us to connect different devices and software together in awesome ways for many, many years. However, perhaps it's time that we were able to move forward into something perhaps better. Can I suggest that? I mean, a revolution in computer technology is built up around MIDI, and yet MIDI has sat there for 35 years odd, completely static. And it stays dumb and passive and surprisingly low resolution. I mean, at the time, of course, with control voltage, you were controlling one thing with one cable. I can do one thing with my CV cable over into here. And so MIDI came along and said, well, I can do 128 things down 16 channels with this single cable. So, I mean, that was flipping awesome. So, of course, MIDI has been a revolutionary, awesome thing. But there it stayed. I stumbled across this old article in the April 1983 edition of Sound on Sound, where this guy called Chris Jordan talks about everything that was wrong with MIDI, which had been like introduced a couple of years earlier. And he spoke at length about how it needs to develop and what needs to progress in the next couple of years in order to make it a more useful technology. None of the things he talked about have come into being. None of them. It's remained completely unaltered. So where's the problem? Well, there can be timing issues when you have extraordinary amounts of gear, although very few people actually encounter them. So it's not really about that. It's about the limitations of MIDI and things that we really should be past by now. I mean, MIDI is a serial interface. It does things one at a time, which means it can be quite slow, which is where the timing problem comes in. Because if you've got an awful lot of external hardware as well as virtual stuff inside, there's a lot of data that needs to move. And because it's doing one thing at a time, it's doing it very slowly compared to something that can parallel process or do multi-threads. It's also unidirectional. It only goes one way. You have to plug from one thing to another, and then the data's only going to move in that direction. There's no ask a question, get a response like we have in computer technology. It just goes in one direction. I mean, the amount of tech support you had to do for people who just had their cables in the wrong place. And I'm sure that still goes on today. It was also designed for keyboard players. And so when other people want to get involved, guitarists and other instrument players, it never quite works right. I mean, you know, the pitch tracking technology can be very clever, but the ergonomics of it all and how it works is just tailored for keyboard players. And it's just never quite satisfactory using any other sort of device. Now, there have been a few recent technologies that have really sort of brought this home to me. The first one is OSC. First time I used Touch OSC on the iPad, it just sort of blew my mind, really. You know, once you've faffed around with all the MIDI settings to get the MIDI over LAN to work in that direction and this direction and so on and so forth, once you'd got over the MIDI hump, then Touch OSC just went in and it pulled all this information out of Ableton Live and threw it up on the screen for you. And you just went, wow, that's really, wow, that's amazing. Isn't this great? Why don't we have this all the time? Well, indeed, why don't we have it all the time? I mean, MIDI just can't do that. I mean, this is nicely highlighted in Yeko, which is a touch controller for Ableton Live, because it has, you know, a page of MIDI controls, and they're all sliders and knobs and stuff, you know, looking at you very dumbly. They haven't got a clue what's going on, but you can move one and then map it to the software in Ableton, and oh, there you go, I've got movement over that. Whereas when you look onto an OSC-based page, and all of that data is being pulled in and constantly updated to and fro, and it's just there, and you know what it is you're controlling, and you haven't had to worry about it or map it or go into weird settings pages and mess about with it. It's just kind of there, and it really highlighted for me how MIDI is just stupid. It's just I don't think up to the task these days. The next thing is MPE, multi-dimensional polyphonic expression. It's an extraordinary technology that's being used by Rolly keyboards and the Linstrument and other bits and pieces, and it gives you the ability to use expression on individual notes. So with MIDI, you hit a chord and you push the pitch bend, and the pitch bend controls every single note. It affects every note, because any modulation changes, any controller changes that go down that channel affect everything on that channel. And most of the time, that's all right. But once you start using MPE, you realize actually how poor that is. Now, MPE works with a sort of a MIDI hack in that it pushes all the different notes that are played down different MIDI channels, which allows them to be controlled separately. I mean, it's genius really, but it's a workaround. And actually, this is one of the things that our guy from the Sound on Sound article said, and he called it Mode 4, which is the ability to control individual notes individually within a polyphonic situation. So it's something that's been talked about for decades, but only now is it just starting to appear. And surely it would be better accomplished through, you know, a newer technology, a replacement of MIDI, rather than having to fudge it through in some kind of a MIDI hack, as I say. And the last one is Ableton Link. I mean, it's a great technology that any device on a network that has Ableton Link can control or follow the tempo. It's a shared sort of tempo device. With MIDI works in a master and a slave. Because it's unidirectional, you have to have a master that's in charge of the tempo, and that can send that timing data, that sync data, out to all the other devices, and they all stay in time with that. But if you wanted to then use a different device as the master, you would have to stop and you would have to reset all of that, and perhaps even recable to make that happen. With Ableton Link, anything on that device chain can just move the tempo and everybody else follows it, and that one does it and you all follow it. It's a fantastic tool for collaboration and for musicians playing together. It's just fantastic, and it seems to be so simple, and it just works. I mean, those are the key things really, the fact that it's simple and it works. That's all we ever want. And then finally we have the resolution, those 128 steps. Now, I'm sure to most of us, we don't really notice when we move a fader that it's stepping through 128 values, you know, but in other situations, when you're talking about oscillators, when you talk about modulation, filters and such like, it does start to become noticeable. And there's something very quantized about it. Now, MIDI initially triumphed over control voltage because it could do so much, but it's interesting how control voltage is making, you know, a massive comeback at the moment, because doing one thing with one cable properly actually has a lot of merit. And when you think about it, how many automation lanes do you actually have on all of your MIDI tracks? And could you achieve the same thing with just a couple of more intentional cables that you'd use by using control voltage? And on that cable is a continuously varying voltage of infinite value. And people, I think, are finding that that has a better feel, somehow a more natural sound and sense to it than MIDI does. So what about MIDI 2.0 or HD MIDI? Well, it's been talked about for years and years and years, but I just don't know if anyone actually believes it's going to happen anymore. I mean, back when MIDI was invented, it happened at a certain time and a place when it was really, really needed. You know, and it was cheap to reproduce. The parts were cheap. It used existing cabling. You know, every manufacturer could implement it easily with all their gear, and so it was fantastic. You know, these days, the way that companies protect their intellectual property, the difficulty with patents and copyright, I find it difficult to see how it's going to happen unless one big manufacturer really pushes it forward. So I don't know. I mean, one of the reasons it's becoming a bit of an issue now is because of the return to dominance of hardware. You know, after spending a long time getting increasingly in the box. We are now increasingly outside the box. And of course, people are starting to run into those timing issues and limitations. And they're also wanting to combine analog and control voltage with MIDI. And that has its issues as well. And people are rediscovering that control voltage is actually really easy. And look, I plug this in it and it works. I'm not having to set it up or work anything out. It's just a cable and it does something, and it does it brilliantly, and it sounds fabulous. And all of that, for me, says that we need something which can pull it all together. I mean, we're going to have a hodgepodge of MIDI and OSC and MIDI to CV conversion and Ableton Link and network and Ordinate and all these different technologies all fighting with each other. You know, that's what we deal with. That's fine. We can cope with that, I guess, because we're professionals. But wouldn't it be better to have something that seamlessly integrates hardware and software, that can do your control voltages, can do digital control and analog control, and bring it all together in some kind of simple, maybe even wire-free way? You know, that could be really interesting, but I don't hold out a great deal of hope for it. Well, there you go. Phew, that was nice. I feel released. I feel a little bit taller and open, like I can breathe. Now I've got those things off my chest. Well, it wasn't so bad really, was it? No, I don't think so. And, you know, of course, all of these things work and all these things are wonderful, and I embrace all of these technologies, and we work with them, we continue with them. It's just, you know, I just wanted an opportunity just to go, and I feel I've done that. So is anything coming up? Yes. Just to throw in there that Bitwig 2 Studio has been released and it looks fabulous, and I am going to be doing a review on that very soon, so look out for that. Well, you might need to give me a couple of weeks. Also, with the whole Molten modular experience, my journey into modular synthesis is now getting to a very important point, because I have now purchased a case and a power supply. I am ready to go, and I'm currently bothering manufacturers with questions about what modules I should buy, what they recommend, what should I get. I mean, I'm only going to get a few, at least I think, so I need to pick wisely, and I'm desperately trying not to make a terrible mistake with any of my choices of module. So we're really poised at that point where I might actually make some kind of sound, so that'll be nice. And finally, if you like my videos, then please share them, tell your friends, post them to your social networks, and subscribe. I mean, at the moment, at the time of writing, I have 993,884 views, which is amazing. I mean, that's 3 years worth of making videos, and I love making these videos. I really do enjoy nothing more than putting together these videos. And it feels awesome to be that close to hitting 1 million views. I just can't quite wrap my head around it. But that's not enough. I'm not satisfied with that. I want 2 million. I mean, at the moment we're on about 8,000 subscribers. It would be great to get to 10,000 subscribers. I think the videos on this channel have a great deal of value. You know, I put a lot of work into it, and I think there's stuff in here that people find useful. At least that's what I gather from the feedback I get. And so it would be great if more people were able to benefit from it. I mean, that's all we want. We just want people to have good information, to learn stuff perhaps, and to have a bit of a laugh. And that's hopefully, that's kind of what I offer. I don't know. But that'll do. Look at that. The sun's just come out. So in the meantime, go and make some tunes.